Let's talk to Rupert Bell about this. He's talkRADIO's royal correspondent joins us now. Good morning to you, Rupert.
It's been an interesting weekend, hasn't it?
It certainly has. I mean, we must actually play some of the excerpts from the interview. I can't believe anyone hasn't actually seen or heard of these so far. Let's play, first of all, an excerpt of what he had to say in terms of why he chose to stay at Jeffrey Epstein's house. Now, bearing in mind the time when he stayed in Jeffrey Epstein's house for 4 days and went to visit with him in New York, and this is when he was photographed in the park walking with him. Jeffrey Epstein was, at that point, already a convicted paedophile who had been released from prison after serving, really, in an open prison, rather easy terms, I think. But he had already been a convicted paedophile. And he was questioned by Emily Maitlis during this interview about why he'd been staying at his house.
It was a convenient place to stay. I've gone through this in my mind so many times. At the end of the day, with the benefit of all the hindsight that one could have, it was definitely the wrong thing to do. But at the time, I felt it was the honourable and right thing to do. And I admit fully that my judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable.
I have to say, this was, I think, a defining moment in that interview, wasn't it, Rupert? This idea of being too honourable because he wanted to go and break up with a man who he claimed was, well, not a particularly good friend, but in person, by going to visit him and staying at his house for 4 days.
I'm afraid it's not too honourable, it's too stupid. I mean, that's basically the nutshell here. I mean, I don't know what he was thinking. I mean, I don't think he just must, to be too honourable when you know the guy is a convicted of sex crimes. I just don't know what he was thinking. And okay, he says he's analysed time and time again, but I'm afraid it either shows deep arrogance, and he's often been accused of being very arrogant, and also he's coupled that with stupidity here. And I'm sorry, that's the problem. And that's really what seems to be overriding this. He doesn't hasn't thought it through at the time, and he thinks, oh, well, I'm a member of the royal family, I can get away with it. Well,
and that to me is the big takeaway, isn't it? This idea that he obviously just thought he could do that. And we know that there's clearly this staged photo of him in walking through Central Park with this man. But this is the thing. This was an ongoing, long relationship. He'd stated he'd been to his island in the Caribbean. His claim is that during this interview was that his relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the girlfriend and longtime friend of Jeffrey Epstein, and that was the key relationship. But this is a man who he says, well, he wasn't really a friend of his, and yet he repeatedly stayed in his properties. He felt the relationship was strong enough that he had to go and fly across the Atlantic to go and break up with him, apparently, but also invited him to one of his daughter's birthday parties. I mean, I'm not quite sure what word you would use other than good friend at that point.
Well, absolutely. Now you meet someone, what he referred to him as Ghislaine's plus one. Well, they became, you meet someone's plus one, you then become friends. Well, that's clearly what's happened. Why can't he just admit it? And then actually what his big error seemed to me that he didn't want to apologise for any of his actions, putting it in, in inverted commas, I was being honourable. I'm afraid I think he wanted, and one of the reasons I think he wanted to do it is he wanted to feel he could get public support and sympathy for him. Well, I'm afraid if he thought that was a good idea, well, he's got no sympathy now. And it must be very sad. Actually, I feel for his 2 children. What they must be thinking of what their dad's gone and done, because in a way he would have been better off to shut up and put up and shut up and not draw attention to it. Well, just make himself look seriously stupid. That's sadly what
this is the thing. My big takeaway from this was that actually this isn't a very bright man, and he's certainly not clever enough to listen to his new PR advisor, Jason Stein, who's only been in the job for a couple of months and has already resigned on the basis that this would be crazy. But this was something key, wasn't it? When he talked about being too honourable, he showed no remorse, no regrets whatsoever over having that friendship. He also expressed at no point, despite being given the opportunity by Emily Maitlis at the very end, is anything else you'd like to say? And he said, no, I think we've covered it all. It was all about him. It was all me. And there was nothing about the victims. Now, whether or not he met any of these young women, or girls as they were at the time, they were underage at the time, or whether he had met them or anything else happened, which of course he denies, he now knows for a fact, because this man was a convicted paedophile, sex offender and trafficker, and committed suicide, facing numerous charges. Some 100 women now claim that they were trafficked by him. He expressed not a tiny iota of concern, remorse at all for these women. That's probably one of the most damning things, isn't it?
Yeah, and without question. I mean, his behaviour over the years, people say that he is arrogant and boorish, and I think at times that seemed to be what was coming across. And I think his arrogance has found him out here, because he should, and actually care and show a feeling. And he's stuck away in the ivory tower of Buckingham Palace and not in touch with the real world. And it proved yesterday, this documentary proved that, sadly for him. However good intentioned he might have been to do this interview, it unfortunately has opened up now all the issues and has shown him in a poor light. And, what it means going forward. I know he has, roles as Colonel-in-Chief of, indeed, my former regiment, the Grenadier Guards. Well, what will his people in the Grenadier Guards think of him? For example, the officers in that regiment, what will they think? Do they want him as their Colonel-in-Chief? I don't know. And I feel the person I feel most sad for, it is the Queen, because she is extremely loyal. And he has had his sort of unwritten rule as being, the person is seen in public with the Queen, while Prince Philip now obviously doesn't do any public duties. It's the Duke of York who's by her side. What will she be feeling now that the son that she people say that she loves him more than the others, as it were. Well, what will she be feeling now that to see her son being humiliated like this by everybody?
Well, I mean, the thing is, by all accounts, judging by one of the papers today is reporting that the Queen did not give approval for this. She was the only senior royal who was given knowledge in advance of this, but the word seems to be coming out that no, she did not approve this interview. I think the Queen is certainly clever enough to know that Andrew wouldn't be able to walk this interview very well. By all accounts, so he did tell her at church yesterday that it had gone very well. I wonder whether she would have watched it or not. But again, we're back into the same situation where the known facts alone are so damning, regardless of what ever happened behind closed doors. The known facts of staying in the house of someone who's a convicted paedophile, being seen with them, inviting them to your daughter's party and the like, is a problem. Can we also talk about something? I mean, there's obviously a lot of no recollections, he says, about the photograph that we've all seen. Can we also just play a little clip of what will now forever be known as the Pizza Express in Woking defence?
On that particular day that we now understand is the date, which is the 10th of March. I was at home. I was with the children. I'd taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking for a party at I suppose sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And then, because the Duchess was away, we have a simple rule in the family that when one's away, the other one's there. I was on terminal leave at the time from the Royal Navy, so therefore I was at home.
Why would you remember that so specifically? Why would you remember a Pizza Express birthday and being at home?
Because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do.
Rupert Bell, I think that was one of the more laughable moments in the interview, and especially given the fact that Pizza Express in Woking closes at 10:30 p.m. and the nightclub in question that he was supposedly he's been accused of dancing with this 17-year-old trafficked girl, Virginia Roberts, closes at 5 in the morning.
I'm afraid, yes, he would know probably from his diary where he was, because I'm sure the Royals keep diaries, but and their calendars, so he could probably find it retrospectively. But yes, it just feels, I wouldn't go to a Pizza Express. Well, yes, you can probably appreciate that, but it just felt again uncomfortable, and it was sort of clutching at straws to try and justify everything. Now, of course, everything is allegations, but again, it just seemed like he was trying too hard and not very cleverly.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
seems to me the problem.
Can I point out also that royals do go to Pizza Express, because when I was waitressing in my gap year before uni, I waitressed at a Pizza Express in Soho, and Prince Edward was a regular customer. So royals do go to Pizza Expresses. I can tell you that categorically. Bad tippers. Let's turn our attention to politics. Very much kicked off the front pages by that Prince Andrew interview, but it does return today. With, of course, we've got three-party leaders: Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, and Joe Swinson, speaking at the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry conference today, but also the announcement over the weekend of the Conservatives' new immigration policy. This, of course, was a crucial issue at the Brexit referendum, and of course this is something that's going to play a crucial issue at the next election as well. Let's talk to Alp Mehmet, who's chairman of Migration Watch. Good morning to you, Alp.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Now, because we'd heard a lot about how, the need to limit immigration from the EU, not having free movement from the EU. The Conservatives have said basically they are going to treat migration from anywhere inside the EU or outside the EU as exactly the same, and it's going to be on a points-based system, an Australian-style points-based system where you've got the skills that we need. These points can be changed at any time. If you're an engineer, we need more engineers, and the like, you've got masters in this and that, then you will be welcome in this country. If you haven't got skills, you won't be. However, there's also some talk yesterday about you having to have a job offer in place already before you can get into this country, and that's a rather different policy, isn't it? What do you make of the policy?
Well, I suppose the best thing you can say about it is that we are actually talking about immigration now. There seems to have been a reluctance for years almost even to consider it. As you know, what I'm really concerned about is the scale of immigration at the moment. And nothing I've heard so far from either party, frankly, suggests that there is a firm commitment to have reduced immigration. You're right about the Australian points-based system. It doesn't really mean anything just to say we're going to have an Australian points-based
Well, indeed,
system.
when they introduced that system, it actually increased immigration. But then that's a very, very large country with a tiny population, and they were using the points-based system to increase immigration rather than reduce it.
Indeed, and even they have caps. I mean, there is a cap of 160,000 on workers, for example, at the moment. We've already said that we're not going to have any caps. Of course, there should be a job, and to be fair, Preet Patel has said that there has to be a job for people to come to. But then it depends on what the salary scale is going to be, what the thresholds are going to be, what the skill levels are going to be. And one of the things that we know the Tories want to do, or rather the Migration Advisory Committee has advised them to do, is lower the skill level from the present, this is high skill, lower it from degree level to A level. That in itself will expose a huge number of jobs, something like 9 million jobs to in this country to competition from abroad.
But we also already know, don't we, that a lot of people, immigrants who are university educated, don't actually work in jobs in this country requiring a degree, so they are competing with people at a low skills level already. This is going to be one of the key things. When you talked about the scale of immigration at the moment, causes you concern. We know that also since 2016 the public concern about immigration as an issue has gone down. I assume partly because people felt that the Brexit vote would resolve that. What is the scale at the current time?
The scale of immigration, at the moment, we've got, I think the last figures were 226,000 net. Now, this sounds as if it's getting better, but it's way, way beyond what the sort of levels that we need in order to stabilise our population. At the moment, we're still looking at a population increase, 80% of it due to immigration in one way or another, of 1 million every 3 years. That is simply something that we cannot cope with. The pressures that brings, the need for housing, the queues that you get at GP surgeries, all that is the result of our population increasing at the rate that it is. And immigration is largely responsible for that.
And you say well, largely responsible because in one way or another, and this isn't just people arriving in the country. This is immigrants having children, and so and I believe a higher birth rate, for some particular immigrant groups.
Indeed, there is. We know that those who come will go on to have children, will go on to have families. And this indeed is not Migration Watch pointing to it. This is how the ONS calculates its projections.
The Office for National Statistics, yeah.
Sorry, yes, of course. The Office for National Statistics. That's how they calculate their projections. They look ahead, what the population is going to be growing by, and they include the children that are going to be born to migrants.
Okay.
Otherwise, those children wouldn't be born.
And you mentioned earlier just people getting access to GPs, mentioned the NHS. And a key pledge from the Conservatives today yesterday and today is that overseas visitors should have to pay a surcharge of £625 every time they use the health service. If they come from outside the EU, they're obliged to pay a £400 surcharge if they receive, but they get free treatment if they come from within the EU. But after Brexit, all foreign patients, including those from the EU, will have to pay a £625 fee. That will expected to raise an extra £500 million a year from the NHS and tackle health tourism. But again, the difficulty always is to identify that somebody is someone who's not entitled to that care. There'll be many people who will be working here, taxpayers here, but we don't have identity cards, no way of proving when they go to hospital that they are entitled and have paid towards the NHS, and they might be charged. That's going to create some difficulties in hospitals, isn't it?
Well, there already is in place a system. You have overseas visitor managers in hospitals that have the responsibility to raise funds to ensure that those who are not entitled to free healthcare do pay for it. So it's not going to be a new system. What they're actually doing is increasing from something like £400 to over £600 for each person. And I think most people will regard this as only fair. If you're paying with your taxes and paying a lot for an expensive health service, the privilege of having a national health service is that we have to pay for it. Well, there's absolutely no reason why those who are not paying into it should come here and get the benefits of that service at the point of delivery. And this is not those who have a heart attack or are involved in accidents. We're talking about people who come here and choose to have treatment in hospitals that, frankly, they don't. It's not emergency treatment as such.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm just of the view that everybody coming into this country, in any country, should be required to have health insurance. I don't understand. I wouldn't dream of leaving the country without travel insurance, and that includes the health insurance. I find it extraordinary that isn't just a requirement. And if you can't afford that, I'm not entirely sure you're going to spend that much money in this country as a tourist. In which case, do we want you? But there we are. Let's talk to Sam Gyimah, former Tory MP, of course, spokesman for the Liberal Democrats. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let's talk now. You are obviously the party's spokesman for business. What is the message from the Liberal Democrats today about why you believe you are the party of business?
Well, we believe we are the party of business because we face two stark choices from Labour and the Conservatives. Labour is going to be, if they get into government, will be a hard left government pursuing destructive economic policies. And on the Conservatives, a hard Brexit approach is essentially throwing the economic cards up in the air. As the party that wants to remain in the EU, where we already have a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, we are the party that, by advocating that position, support the interests not just of business, but of those who need to create jobs. Because any deal Boris Johnson negotiates, because he wants to move away from the EU, by definition, he would be trying to negotiate a deal that is worse than our current deal in order to deliver his objectives. So that is why we are the party of business.
And we know that Boris Johnson, one of the things he's going to say to the CBI is, you don't want Brexit, but the people voted for it, and that's why politicians need to deliver it. And your argument is that if you were elected as a majority government, if you got 320 more seats or something, you would actually cancel Brexit altogether. Otherwise, you'd have a second referendum. Given that it is, let's face it, on the polls, pretty unlikely, it would be the most extraordinary upset in British politics if you were elected as a majority government. The best you could hope for really is to be propping up a Corbyn government and getting a second referendum that way. We know that it's business is crying out for certainty. The uncertainty that would lead for another 6 months of a referendum, and even if there was a referendum vote to leave again, the uncertainty would continue there in terms of what the deal would be and more transition periods. Wouldn't you be offering more of a problem for business on that basis?
I think it sounds like you are parroting Conservative Party.
No, it doesn't. I'm putting devil's advocate position to you.
Okay, we have completely ruled out. We will not put Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street. So please stop suggesting that. That is the Conservative Party propaganda. Secondly, when Boris Johnson says that somehow he will provide certainty, we know that he cannot negotiate. Everybody knows he cannot negotiate a free trade agreement in 12 months. And if he fails to do that and doesn't want to extend the transition, we've got no deal. That is even more uncertainty. Thirdly, Boris still continues to insist that we can have our cake and eat it in terms of negotiating an EU free trade deal. We know we can't. We can't leave the EU, have the loosest possible relationship, and still retain the exact same benefits. So what we are saying is you've got to be honest with the public, and you've got to level with the public about the trade-offs that the EU involves, the simplicity, get Brexit done, the simplicity that Labour can negotiate its own new deal that will be so much better and will create jobs. None of that is being honest with the public. And what we say is that at an election, people deserve clear choices, and the choice we are putting before the electorate, and that we know after 3.5 years of doing this, is that when it comes to business and job creation, remaining in the EU, where we have already have a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, and 50% of our trade is in the best interest of our country.
And yet, of course, tying ourselves with the EU, many would argue, not such a good idea when actually the EU faces a lot of uncertainty, still some concerns over the Eurozone, even Germany getting close to recession, 10% unemployment or the like in France, all these booming economies in Asia, in the Americas, and that actually trade deals with those countries might be more beneficial to us.
We are not prevented from trading well with China because we are members of the EU. Germany does a lot of its trade with China. This idea, and all the government's own economic analysis shows it, that we will have a loose trade relation with the EU and be able to make it up with trade agreements with other parts of the world, doesn't hold water. We can, firstly, do it, and secondly, if we lose what we have with the EU, we would not be able to replace it with other trade deals. I think those who want to deliver a hard Brexit should be honest to say what they really want is they don't like the EU, but there is an economic cost in terms of jobs. But to pretend that there is no economic cost in terms of jobs and go ahead with it, I think it's pulling the wool over the eyes of the electorate and unacceptable.
And is there not also an issue with your green business plan, where Sir Ed Davey, your colleagues, has talked about 5-year investment jump-starting efforts to combat the climate emergency, £100 billion to tackle the effects of climate change, protecting the environment. But this would, of course, be funded by borrowing to be paid back by future taxes and by taxes. Now, one of the things that businesses often cry out for is lower taxes, not just on business, but on consumers. So they've got more money in their pockets to spend. That £100 billion worth of spending over 5 years, that could have a big hit on the economy negatively as well. Well, I'm sure you'll say it's going to have a positive hit, but if you take money out of people's pockets, they're not spending it on the high street, that's going to hit business.
Well, let's face it. What we're saying is that we've got historically low borrowing rates. We can borrow to invest in our infrastructure and make our economy greener. But the idea that the Conservatives can fund the NHS, can fund schools, can do all this stuff they're doing, while at the same time throwing the economic cards in the air. That is where the risk is. Or that Labour can do what it's doing, borrowing to fund whatever pledge you can think of the day, is also incredibly risky. The sensible party, and that is why today we are saying that we are the party of business and job creation, is a party that is saying that we know our economic growth rate will be higher if we remain in the EU rather than wandering in the wilderness with Boris trying to figure out what trade deal he supports on any given day. And therefore, with that growing economy, we'll be better placed to fund our infrastructure and to fund our public services. We do not want to gamble with our economic future as a country, and that is why we are the party of business.
Are you concerned at all? I mean, you've moved from the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats, but actually there's not been a Liberal Democrat surge. Did very well in the European elections, coming second, beating Labour and the Tories. However, we're seeing with the general election, the polls, again, as much as we can trust any polls on any given day, and there's a wide variety, admittedly, they are showing consistent moves upwards for the Tories and largely for the Labour Party as well, as we seem to be moving back to two-party politics. There hasn't been a Lib Dem surge. Are you concerned that actually, a party right now with those defections, including yours, got 20 MPs, you could end up with fewer on December the 13th?
Well, I think what I do know is that in the seats in which we are competitive and want to do well, we will do very well. You say Labour is doing very well. John Curtis said, who's the guru when it comes to our polling, that there is almost zero probability of a Labour government. That does not, after almost a decade of the Conservatives being in power, that doesn't tell me that Labour is doing very well. And as far as the Conservatives are concerned, of course, they are trying to exploit the public's exhaustion with the Brexit process to say somehow there is an easy way out. There is no easy way out, and we will continue pointing that out to the electorate in the remaining 24 days of this campaign.
Okay. A key factor in the campaign will be tomorrow night, that ITV leaders debate. How successful so far has that legal action been to get Jo Swinson included?
Well, we will find out what the judgment is when it's ready. So I don't want to prejudge an issue that is being litigated.
All right. I must also ask you about the Prince Andrew interview as a prominent politician, because you could have been Tory leader a few months ago and been the Prime Minister at this time. Prince Andrew...
No, I wasn't going to be... Look, let's listen. I was never going to be Tory leader or Prime Minister. The reason why I stood was to make the case for the party... Okay.
It was a glib remark. To be fair, Sam, but you could have been, in theory, you could have been the person commenting on this time as Prime Minister. Prince Andrew carried out an interview with the BBC on Saturday night. It was, by all accounts, a car crash interview in terms of his relationship with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Are you concerned, especially as a spokesman for business, that this man has been carrying out a role as a trade envoy for the UK, still carrying out some sort of unofficial duties on that front? Yet the fact he's been consorting with a convicted known paedophile?
Well, I haven't had time to actually watch.
Have you not? Really?
Campaign. I've read, but from what I've read in the newspaper, so I haven't watched the interview.
This is the thing. This is probably one of the most watched TV interviews in this country ever, and you haven't. And it's on all the front pages of all the Sunday newspapers and the Monday newspapers.
That's what I was about to say.
And you haven't watched the interview.
What I've read, I haven't watched the full interview, but what I've read so far. One of the things that stands out for me is he's expressed no comments of sympathy, etc., with the victims involved, and I think that stands out as something that is deeply surprising. Let's
talk to someone who can give us the royal perspective on this. Royal biographer Angela Levin, who joins us now. Good morning to you, Angela.
Good morning.
Good morning. First up, your first thoughts on this interview. Was he right to do it or not?
No, I think he was totally wrong, and I think it will haunt him forever once he realises the reaction. I think he's inarticulate. He's full of self-promotion. It's all about him, and he doesn't listen. It's well known that he doesn't listen to his advisory team, and he just goes ahead because I don't think he can understand what he's saying and the effect it will have on people.
Yeah, I did. Again, I think my big takeaway from it was that he just struck me as both very arrogant and really not very bright. And if you're surrounded by yes men, and everyone says, "Oh, yes, Your Highness," constantly to him, no one ever actually questions.
Well, actually, no. Even if they say no, Your Highness, to him, he doesn't listen. Doesn't take any notice.
Let's have a little bit of a listen to some of the things he did say, because it was one of the particular issues is that he did go to stay at the house in New York of Jeffrey Epstein, already at that point a convicted paedophile, convicted of trafficking a young girl. That was already known. He'd served time in jail for it. And yet Prince Andrew did go to stay at his house. And Emily Maitlis questioned him about that. And this is what he had to say.
It was a convenient place to stay. I've gone through this in my mind so many times. At the end of the day, with the benefit of all the hindsight that one could have, it was definitely the wrong thing to do. But at the time, I felt it was the honourable and right thing to do. And I admit fully that my judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable.
That was just an extraordinary explanation. It was just a convenient place to say, as if Prince Andrew, a multi-millionaire, Angela, doesn't have options of hotels and numerous other people he could stay with. And the idea that he was too honourable to break up a friendship with a man who then he claimed, wasn't a very close friend, even though he'd been to his daughter's birthday party and shooting parties at Sandringham and the like. And you had to go and travel across the Atlantic to spend 4 days with him, attend a dinner party with him to break up with him. I mean, none of this adds up, does it?
That was another thing which is incredibly popular. You're not hiding yourself there. The point is, you don't need any hindsight, actually. If you're involved with somebody on a friendship level and they've been accused of and convicted of paedophilia, you don't have to think very hard about staying in touch with them. It's not with all the things of hindsight. He didn't need hindsight. That's what's so appalling about it. It's only now, when it's sort of come back again, that he's actually thinking, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But then I am a very honourable man,
yes.
And you can't just say goodbye without, going and staying with them for 4 days.
As you do. I don't stay with my best friend for 4 days. Let's also talk about one of the things that's perhaps one of the most risible things that has been picked up by people is this mention of Pizza Express in Woking.
On that particular day that we now understand is the date, which is the 10th of March, I was at home. I was with the children. I'd taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking for a party at I suppose sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And then, because the Duchess was away, we have a simple rule in the family that when one's away, the other one's there. I was on terminal leave at the time from the Royal Navy, so therefore I was at home.
Why would you remember that so specifically? Why would you remember a Pizza Express birthday and being at home?
Because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do.
Might be an unusual thing for him to do, Angela. Most of us probably been to Pizza Express. The thing about this, there's been a lot of sort of humour about this, and I think a lot of people talking about this interview. It is quite funny. There is a lot of humour in terms of the ridiculous lines he's talked about, how his inability to sweat after serving in the Falklands, and talking about this photograph and insisting it's fake. Possibly he can't prove the photograph is fake or not. The one with him with this young woman who Jennifer Roberts, who claims that she was basically had forced to have sex with him. And yet we are talking about something very serious. We are talking about a man who's accused of being in a house repeatedly with a man who was known to now be trafficking in young women, young girls, not 17, most of them, like this young lady, but 13, 14, 15, very different. And that everyone else who's testified and spoken to the FBI and done media interviews has said it was impossible not to know what was going on, in which case there are implications for Prince Andrew's own behaviour, further than just what this one woman has made in terms of her allegations. How dangerous do you think this is for the Prince?
I think it's extremely dangerous for him, and I think that he will find, and in a way I hope it will happen, that charities won't think he's going to be very helpful for them as patron. I mean, people would think, what sort of charity is this that has someone who is friends with a paedophile as their patron? I can give my money or help to someone else. I think there will be an incredible backlash about it. And I think that was one of the reasons he wanted to, what he said, draw a line under what happened, because he doesn't want to lose all these charities. It gives him pomp and importance. But they're going to think very carefully.
Well, indeed. I mean, he was actually been working for the NSPCC as an ambassador for them at one point. Now, there has been a big...
at one point.
Yes, exactly. When they're now distancing themselves very quickly from him. Now, there's lots of talk about the Queen, and the Queen, in this story in the Telegraph, basically saying, her representative saying that she hadn't given her blessing to this interview. She knew about it in advance, which is more than, before it was done, more than most of the other senior royals. This is precisely the sort of thing I think the Queen would normally advise against. What should the Queen do now? What do you think she is likely to do? You've had a lot of time with royals and with their courtiers and the people who know them well, writing your biographies. You've written a biography of Prince Harry and others. What should and what is the Queen likely to do now?
Well, her motto is don't explain and don't complain, so she would be highly embarrassed. On the other hand, Andrew is her favourite son. On the other hand, she's 93, and I expect she doesn't want to get too involved in these things. She doesn't like mixing within her children or her grandchildren's relationships. She much prefers to let them get on with it. And she gives them an awful lot of freedom to do what they like, to be at the charities they like. And I think this is very crippling. Also, the Duke of Edinburgh, now 98, is often behind her, and he has sort of rigid rules of behaviour and what is expected of someone in the royal family.
Well,
but
apart from his driving, but we'll let that go.
Yes. But, I mean, I think morally, he likes to be independent. That's why he drove. He doesn't want to be chaperoned round, driven round. Anyway, but I think that they're now not going to get agitated about that. They're very, very old. What will be interesting is what Prince Charles does, because he's never got on with Prince Andrew, and he's the one who can say, I don't want him to do X, Y, Z. He did try, actually, at one point, and Prince Andrew ran to the Queen and said, oh, look what he's doing to me.
Well, this is the thing, because Prince Andrew has been a trade envoy. He's been flying around the world, playing his golf. No, but he has been in the past, and those roles were removed from him over concerns about his lifestyle and some of the relationships he's had with perhaps not the cleanest characters. This is going to need perhaps lead to even more pulling back. But there's also some talk about him perhaps losing his title.
Yes.
Would that happen?
Well, I don't think it'll happen while the Queen's alive, because she will fight for him. She's excused him and pampered him and spoilt him. That's why he behaves in such an arrogant way. But, once she's passed, Prince Charles might well decide that he doesn't deserve that. So he's got to tread very, very, very carefully. And just want to say that, the whole interview was so cringe-making. That's why you laugh, because you're so embarrassed. You don't know where to put yourself. And it's a sort of reaction to that, in a way. Not because it's funny, because you're repulsed by it.
Yes, I mean, it's so risible. I mean, just finally, this big FBI investigation, there's talk of the police here getting involved on their behalf. 100 young women coming forward saying they were trafficked by this close friend of Prince Andrew when he was staying in his house, staying in his island and the like. This could lead to... There's a possibility. All wrongdoing has been denied by Prince Andrew, but there could possibly be a criminal investigation. What likelihood do you think of that going ahead?
Well, he said in the interview that he would discuss it with his lawyers, and if they suggested that he did give a statement, he would do. But even if he's not involved, he's involved sort of next of kin, as it were, because if all these terrible things are about his friend, then they will spill over more and more and more onto him, and he is permanently damaged by it. This is how people are going to see him. This is what people are going to remember. If anything's written about him, all this will go down as well. So it was a very, very bad decision, and will have lots of fallout, I think.
Let's turn our attention away from Prince Andrew, as we've been discussing quite a lot this morning, back onto politics with the announcements today on business from various different political parties. Let's talk now to the Labour Party's Stephen Timms. Good morning to you, Stephen.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Now, we've got the three main party leaders heading to the CBI conference representing big business today. Jeremy Corbyn for the Labour Party, of course, will be speaking about his plans for business. And what is the big announcement from your party today?
Well, I think Jeremy is going to be talking about the serious thinking that's been going on in the Labour Party about how to bring about the green industrial revolution that we need. We are going to need a lot of people trained up to make that happen. And I think he's going to be suggesting training up 80,000 climate apprentices a year in construction, manufacturing, design, renewable energy, transport, sustainable agriculture and forestry, funded largely from the existing apprenticeship levy, much of which the current government is not spending on apprenticeships. They've fallen way short of the 3 million target they set for the number of apprenticeship starts by 2020.
Indeed. There's always been so much talk about why don't we talk about apprenticeships, and then when there are apprenticeship targets, they don't seem to be caught by anybody. Exactly. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, he's going to announce these reforms to the apprenticeship levy, he says, which will better meet the needs of workers and employers, creating a climate apprenticeship programme to deliver 320,000 apprenticeships in England in the first term in government, and by 2030, creating 886,000 apprenticeships. I mean, this is a very ambitious target, especially given that the current government, is a different political party, has failed to deliver on this front. But this also ties in, does it not, with the demand of business constantly saying, look, one of the reasons why CBI, for instance, is opposed to Brexit is they want to keep that supply of labour coming from the EU because of a skill shortage here in the UK. So does that imply in any way that we are going to be seeing a certain closing of the borders if there was, say, if you had the second referendum, you negotiate a new deal, and then a Labour new Brexit deal would involve some sort of limitation on numbers coming from the EU?
No, I think it's a separate issue. I think whatever happens, we are going to need to train up a lot of people with new skills in order to deliver the changes that we need. I'm sure that CBI members are going to be extremely worried about Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, partly for the reason that you mentioned, but also because under Boris Johnson's proposals, companies exporting to Europe are going to be tied up with red tape they've never had to worry about before. Rules of origin declarations, security declarations. It's all going to make, if it goes ahead, exporting to Europe much, much harder. And I think it poses a real threat to the future of the car industry, aerospace industry in the UK. So I'm sure that CBI members are going to want to raise questions about that with the Prime Minister today.
Why do you think we do have such a skill shortage in this country? I mean, countries like Germany over the years have, part of the EU obviously, subject to free movement, they have made a great inroads in terms of particularly technical training and apprenticeship style training, not university training, education as such. Whereas our country, just hasn't done it. Is it partly down to quite a lot of snobbery on the part of politicians over the years?
I think it's a mixture of things. And of course, the German system, which is very, very impressive, goes back, 100 years. It goes back to Bismarck. It's very deeply ingrained in the German system. And we've never managed to reproduce that here. There have been various attempts to do so. I think now that there is this massive change that's going to happen to the economy over the next decade or two around responding to climate change, it makes it an absolute imperative that we do put in place the measures to deliver the training and investment that are required.
You talked about Brexit as part of this issue and why you think that Labour policy is going to be more appealing to business. And we know that certainly the CBI was opposed to Brexit. Yesterday, Jeremy Corbyn, your party leader, was on the Andrea Marsh show and declined 4 times to say whether he wanted Brexit to happen and believed in Brexit or not. We're still in the dark as to what side either Jeremy Corbyn or many members of the front bench of your party would campaign for. So that given that the policy is if you're elected with a majority government or with a minority, say with another party backing you up, that you would have 3 months to negotiate a new Brexit deal, and then 3 months after that there would be a referendum with Remain as one option and the new Labour Brexit deal is the other option. And it is yet to be decided which the Labour Party would campaign for in that election. Do you know whether Jeremy Corbyn would support the Remain option or whatever Brexit deal he's negotiated?
Well, I will be campaigning to Remain in that referendum, and I think the policy that you've just described is absolutely the right way forward for Britain. Now, on the one hand, you've got Boris Johnson wanting to press ahead with this deal, which will be so damaging to exporters and to the economy. And Boris Johnson opted for a general election instead of allowing Parliament to scrutinise his deal. And I believe that's because he didn't want people to realise just what's involved in what he's negotiated. You've got that on one extreme. You've got the Lib Dems on the other saying, no, let's just cancel Brexit, forget about the referendum. I think the right approach now is to say we are going to go back to the people. We've got a proposal for taking us out of the EU. Do we want to go ahead with leaving the EU on that basis, or now we know the details, would we prefer to stay in the EU? And I will be campaigning to remain in the EU.
OK. Now we've got the big ITV TV debate tomorrow night. It's the first head-to-head between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson. Still waiting to find out if a legal action by Joe Swinson and Nicola Sturgeon from Lib Dems and the SNP would actually enable one of them to be in those TV debates. But the Tories currently, in some polls, a 17-point lead. The polls are all over the place, but they are largely showing an increase in Tory votes, but they're also seeing an increase in Labour votes, so they're a long way behind, taking votes off the Liberal Democrats as the election campaign moves on. But are you confident that Jeremy Corbyn can, 2 years on from the 2017 election campaign, when both he was pretty unknown, and indeed Theresa May as a campaigner was pretty unknown, do you think now we know Jeremy Corbyn well, we've seen Boris Johnson on the campaign trail for the Tory leadership, that your party leader can make up that 17-point difference by December the 12th?
I'm hopeful. I mean, I think you're right that the opinion polls at the moment are about in the same position that they were in at this stage in the last general election 2 years ago. So we know the gap certainly is bridgeable. I'm very hopeful that as people look more closely at what the Tories are proposing, at the really damaging prospects for the economy that are ahead, that people will choose to support the Labour proposals. And of course, our manifesto is going to be published later this week. That was a key moment in the 2017 election campaign. I hope it'll be equally significant in this election campaign.
We're told it's going to be even more radical than the 2017 manifesto. Is that right?
I haven't seen it. I'm hoping it will be just as popular as the one 2 years ago. Well,
it was just as popular that it saw the Labour Party definitely go up in the ratings, but it still meant that you lost the election. So you wanted to be just as popular but not win the election?
No, I'm hoping it's going to win us the election.
Well, I'd clarify that.
What we managed in 2017, of course, was to deprive the Tories of a manifesto. They thought they were going to romp it in 2017 with a big majority for Theresa May, and partly thanks to, in fact, I think in large part, thanks to our manifesto in 2017, we stopped the Tories getting a majority. I hope this time it'll deliver a majority for Labour.
And just finally, the Prince Andrew interview with Emily Maitlis on Saturday night dominated the front pages of pretty much every newspaper for 2 days in a row now. Is it time for Prince Andrew to withdraw from public life?
That's not a matter that I've thought very much about. I confess that I missed the interview over the weekend with all the activity of the election campaign.
No politicians seem to have seen this interview. It's really strange.
Yeah, well, I certainly didn't. But that's not a view not a matter I've been taking a view on up until now.
Environmental activists from Extinction Rebellion are today launching a week-long hunger strike in a bid to force global leaders to urgently tackle the climate emergency. Donnachadh McCarthy is from Extinction Rebellion. But Donnachadh, you're not taking part in the hunger strike. Don't you care about the future of our planet or our children?
Well, of course I do, and I hope you do as well.
Not enough not to eat.
Well, I'm full of respect for the people who are participating in this hunger strike this week. It's a sign of desperation at the fact that our governments haven't taken action over the last 40 years to tackle the exploding destruction of our nature, the damaging of our oceans and our soil. And it is really a cry of desperation, both in the UK and across the world. There's 350 people in 22 countries calling on the governments to take the action necessary.
So there's 350 people in each country or across the world? Because that's not that many people, is it?
It's across the world. I think the fact that 350 people are staging hunger strikes symbolically outside their governments and in Britain outside the offices of the three major political parties in this general election is a sign it's a symbol calling for people to take action.
I mean, but about things, you talk about, it's a sign of desperation. People haven't acted for 40 years. Virtually, I mean, the British government, for instance, is pledging goodness knows how many different ways of dealing with the climate change. And for 40 years, people didn't. I mean, this whole idea of us being in a crisis and a catastrophe, this is a very recent PR development from climate activists. This isn't something that people have not been talking about that for the last 40 years.
See, I mean, it's almost nearly 35 years since James Hansen told the US Congress that if they didn't start taking action globally on climate emissions, we would start facing extraordinary consequences to the global climate and to the global environment. And that is what he was predicting 30, 40 years ago is happening. There was a meeting of world governments.
What's happening right now that is in terms of a catastrophe and a crisis?
Well, we've lost 60% of nature since I was born.
No, we haven't.
Yes, we have.
No, we haven't.
It is UN. Julia, I really, my heart breaks when I hear you saying things like this.
No, I use facts.
Julia, I am quoting UN bodies. I'm quoting international treaties.
You're misquoting
organizations.
them.
And why do you think that you are wrong and the UN?
Because you're misquoting them.
Where do you? So let's take rainforest. How much of the rainforest is present today that was present 50 years ago?
I don't know that fact offhand.
50% of the rainforest has been lost, and that means 50% of the animal populations, bird populations, fish populations are gone, and so therefore we are facing a crisis. Michael Gove has said 40% of our soil. 40 years. We've only got 40 years of fertility in British soil.
Michael Gove's wrong about that as well. Business seems to be the order of the day in terms of the election campaign. The Prime Minister, also the Labour leader and the Lib Dem leader, all going to be making speeches at the Confederation of British Industry today. Major business announcements being announced. We're joined now by the Business Secretary and Conservative, Andrea Leadsom. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. So, yes, attention very much turning to business, although it's interesting that in the quotes we've seen in advance of Boris Johnson's speech today, he says, let's not beat around the bush. Big business didn't want Brexit. You made that clear in 2016. What's also clear is, you want certainty. Basically said, well, you didn't want it. The people did vote for it. And so it was for politicians to deliver it. There's a certain level of sort of a chutzpah there, isn't there?
Well, I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, actually. I mean, big business are certainly very concerned about the ongoing relationship with the EU. But as Carolyn Fairbairn, who runs the CBI, has said, they've never sought to overturn that democratic vote. It was the biggest democratic vote ever undertaken. And what they want is the certainty of a deal. And that's what Boris is offering. So wherever I go around the country, in all four nations, businesses are saying to me that it's the uncertainty now that's really damaging. So to leave with a deal that Boris Johnson has means we can then move on. Businesses can have certainty. They can start to invest again, to make hiring decisions. And that's going to be good for the country, good for the economy.
Well, we're looking at, say, a business rates cut, a jobs tax cut, the national insurance contributions cut by £1,000 for over 500,000 employers, a construction tax cut and a research tax cut. There's a lot of this has been announced. A lot of this, though, I mean, in terms of business rates and national insurance contributions, businesses, small businesses in particular, have been crying out for this for years. What's taken so long?
Well, we've actually significantly reduced business rates for small businesses, a £13 billion business rates cut for small business. So we've already done a lot to try and help the high streets to turn around some of the problems that they've had. But what we want to do is a more fundamental reform of the way business rates work to make sure that it's fair to all businesses.
Can we also talk about how this does relate to Brexit, indeed particularly immigration policy? Your party released information about the plans for requiring people coming from inside the EU or outside the EU to have basically facing the same points-based system and having to have a job offer and having a level of skills to give to this country. Have we decided yet what sort of salaries we'd be looking at and what the points-based system would be in the event of a Tory Brexit?
So at the moment, the Migration Advisory Committee, which is the very trusted advisor on migration issues, have two consultations, one on the needs of the economy for workforce from overseas, and the other on the issues around things like pay scales and that sort of thing. So those two reports will produce their findings in January. And for me as business secretary, I've certainly fed in the views that I've gleaned from different businesses and trade bodies on what they think they need. So I think we'll have a very comprehensive and much better understanding of the needs of our economy. But the key thing about the new immigration system is it will be fair to everyone around the world instead of free movement for the EU and much trickier barriers for others. And it will also make sure that everybody is paying their fair share of public services. So you won't be eligible for benefits when you arrive, and you'll contribute to the NHS the same way that people who live here and work here already do. So I think it's going to be a much better, much improved system.
Now, of course, you're competing particularly with the Labour Party at the moment, 17 points ahead, according to one poll at the weekend, looking good at the moment, again, ahead of the manifestos being published, which, of course, when it all started to go horribly wrong for Theresa May in 2017. But one of the things you're having to compete with the Labour Party, particularly, is all the Labour giveaways in terms of free broadband, free dental checkups, and a number of other freebies as well. And a lot of other policies, very, very popular, like nationalisations of utilities, train companies and the like. A lot of these policies very much poo-pooed by those in business and by those on the Conservative side. When you look at the polls, very popular with ordinary voters. How are you going to compete with not just the giveaways, but these very populist policies?
The point is that they are not free. I mean, they're sort of headlined as freebies and giveaways, but of course they're not. They have huge costs attached to them. So Labour's announcements on nationalising everything from sort of energy to water to railways to the mail and now broadband, those are hundreds of billions of pounds. So in order to pay for that, they'll have to raise borrowing, which will raise the costs of borrowing because of the lack of confidence in our economy. They also intend quite clearly to raise corporation tax rates, which is a disincentive to business. So over the last 9 years, Conservative governments have dropped corporation tax, and what that's led to is a 45% increase in the amount of tax that's raised from companies. Labour want to turn that around and start taxing businesses more. So it is those taxes that we receive that enable us to pay for public services. So we need a strong and thriving economy, and what Labour's plans are will absolutely destroy that.
Well, why do you think, though, after all these years, 9 years of Conservative government, and we've had, very, very left-wing Labour leaders in the past, the likes of Michael Foot and others. Now, I mean, why on earth do you think the government and the Conservatives have failed to convince voters of the value of the free market, the value of capitalism? Why are so many people supportive of socialism as a principle, of nationalisation of companies after years of privatisation? Why do you think that argument either hasn't been won or perhaps it was won and then forgotten about? Why are you still fighting? We are basically back into, early 1980s territory of arguing between left and right. Why are we back in that position?
I don't think people are saying socialism is good. I think people are just interested in the offer of free things, and it's our job as the Conservatives, who are the sensible, moderate Conservatives, who will point out to people that these things aren't free, that there are huge consequences in damaging our economy, and if you do that, then you lose jobs. And so all of the incredible, over 3.5 million more people in work since 2010, Our tax revenues have increased significantly. We've sorted out our economy after Labour's recession in the 2008-2009. We've actually turned things around, and Labour's pledges would undo all of that, and it would be a disaster for our economy.
Now, we're not going to see the Tory manifesto published for a few days yet. Labour won, we know, it out on Thursday. This is all coming after that TV debate on Tuesday night. What went wrong in 2017 was actually a very, very poor reaction to the Tory party manifesto, particularly issues like social care. But we also know that manifesto wasn't shared with the cabinet. Theresa May and her advisors just gone ahead with it themselves. Are you aware with what's in the Tory manifesto, not just in your own brief, but across the board? Has the rest of the cabinet seen the manifesto?
Yep, there's been very careful and, multiple layers of consultation. So, yes, I would say Cabinet has been very much included, and we've thought very long and hard about what it is we want to set out to the people. And in effect, it is to continue to be one nation Conservatives, to be there for all people in our country, right across the United Kingdom, to set out our commitments to letting people keep more of the cash that they earn, but at the same time doing more to boost business, but really importantly as well to be a global leader in tackling climate change. And all of these things will be in our manifesto for people to see.
And just finally, I must ask you about the story that has dominated virtually every newspaper front page and every headline online and on the radio and TV for the last 2 days, and that's the interview with Prince Andrew. Some extraordinary revelations there, totally regarded as a car crash, I think, universally by everyone other than Prince Andrew. What did you make of his interview? Bearing in mind he's been a trade envoy for this country and still often seen to represent the country in some of international relations, about the role that Prince Andrew should play in public life in future, given his close friendship and no regrets over his close friendship with a convicted paedophile.
Well, I did a huge amount of work as Leader of the Commons on stamping out harassment and bullying in Parliament, and I will always defend people who've been badly treated. But at the same time, I just don't think it's appropriate for me to comment on this particular issue, and I never have commented on any particular cases.
Okay, did you see the documentary?
I didn't.
It's amazing. I've yet to find a politician today who saw this documentary. The rest of the world watched it.
Well, obviously, I've seen clips of it, but I mean, as I say, I will always stand up for people who've been badly treated, but I won't comment on particular cases.
Okay.